Just wanted to say hi to everyone. Thank you all for joining the Early Childhood Equity Fund orientation and for agreeing to be a part of the Equity Fund Review Committee. Next slide, please. Now, the next slide here, you'll see the two presenters today. It's going to be me and Amanda. And so just wanted to say, well, warm welcome to you all. My name is Kimberly Moa, and I am the Early Childhood Equity Fund Manager. And so I will be overseeing this amazing opportunity that we have in our beautiful state of Oregon.
Great, thanks, Kim. My name is Amanda Manhattis. I am with the Chalkboard Project, and I'm going to be chairing this review committee, and just wanted to say how excited we are to have Kim on board as the Early Childhood Equity Fund Manager. I'm also excited to have the opportunity to chair the committee for this new program. It's a really innovative, important moment for Oregon in establishing these kinds of programs. So excited and just want to welcome everybody for participating in this. And thank you. So before Kim reviews the agenda for this orientation, I just wanted to take a moment to cover a few housekeeping items. I know many of you are probably online experts at this point. I know I've seen some of you in other Zoom calls, but I know that's not the norm for everybody, and people have varying levels of access in terms of Wi-Fi stability, things like that. So I'm going to go over these norms, and we'll also revisit this during our meeting on the 20th. So just to go down, if at all possible, please use the video function, especially since we're a smaller group. It's just nice to put a face to a name sometimes. I know later on we might shift to a full screen, but it's just a way for us to get to know each other in this strange new normal. Please test your technology before the meeting begins and resolve any technical issues. You can use the mute button at your site to prevent transmitting background noise. Please use the chat box for clarifying questions if it's easier. Sometimes it's hard to see folks if you have multiple little boxes up, and so Nikisha will be tracking questions. Participate in using visual cues. For example, if you want to ask a question, thumbs up, thumbs down, as a way of communicating a whole group response. And so this will be key during the longer meeting on the 20th, but we have opportunities to practice now. And silence means alignment. So if folks are silent, I think we're going to assume as facilitators that we're good to move forward. And most importantly, be patient with the technology. Again, we're all learning here, and sometimes it could be a little finicky. If you do have issue with the technology, you can put that in the chat. If you're somehow getting knocked out, send Nikisha or one of the folks from the ELD an email, and we'll try to troubleshoot that in real time. But just know that that may happen, and so we just ask for your patience and grace on that. Cool, so I'll pass it back to Kim.
All right. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of information for us to cover today, but we want you to feel free to ask any questions along the way. So if you have your video on, just raise your hand. It will say your name. And if you don't have your video on, you can put it in the chat box, and then Nikisha will let us know, okay? And so we want to provide as much clarity as we possibly can today to ensure that when we meet next Wednesday, it's a smooth meeting. And so as you can see from the agenda, first we're going to move with a round of introductions. Kind of like Amanda said, we're a small group, and so it'd be great to kind of see and hear and know who's all in the meeting and who's all here and who's all part of the committee, and the staff are here. And then Amanda is going to provide you an overview of the Early Childhood Equity Fund to ground us for the vision and the purpose of the law, kind of like how did this all come about and why. And then finally, I'll go over the community review process to go over the goals as a community committee, and then we'll go ahead and go with if you have any questions at the end as well, we'll provide answers the best that we can. And so first, let's start with introductions. Next slide. So we'll start with the ELD staff. To the folks that may not know what ELD is the Early Learning Division. And so what we'll do is we'll start with the Early Learning Division staff, and then we'll invite the committee members. You all can chime in and share your information, your introductions. Please share your name, your pronouns, your organization, your affiliation, and one thing that excites you about participating in this review committee, basically kind of like, why did you say yes to this opportunity. Okay, and so what I'll do is I'll start us off, and then we'll go ahead and go with the early learning division staff, and then we'll go with the committee review members. So like I said earlier, my name is Kimberly Moa. I am the Early Childhood Equity Fund Manager. I go by she, her, and hers. I recently joined the early learning division, and I'm very, very excited to be part of this initiative. I'm still very new, so I'm learning as I'm going as well. Previously, I was a Head Start and Early Head Start director at Mount Hood Community College, and so now I'm on board with the early learning division. One thing that really excites me about participating in this process is really getting to hear the different ideas and the visions that organizations throughout the state of Oregon has towards serving diverse populations. And so it's very empowering hearing and reading kind of their goals and what they're trying to do. And so it motivates me and it makes me happy to see that, you know what, there's a lot of passionate people towards this work. And I'm glad to see that it's spread out geographically throughout Oregon. Nikisha or Adina, if you guys would like to introduce yourself.
This is Nikisha. I'll go next. My name is Nikisha Knight Coyle, and I'm the Director of Grants and Operations at the Early Division. It's home to a team of grant specialists, as well as some data and IT and project management analysts. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And one thing that really excites me about this process is to see us finally arrive at the point of awarding grants to providers. It's been a long time coming, you know, from the times way back, all of the advocacy leading up until this point, the last year and a half of conversations and planning and discussion through rules and through the release of the RFA. I feel like this just continues to be a very fruitful process, and I'm very excited to see where we land in terms of the grants that get awarded. It's by far going to be sort of the first step in a lot of work ahead, but an important step. I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adina Hayslip. I am Equity Grant Specialist, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am very excited to be part of this amazing program. And one thing that excites me the most is just learning about these amazing organizations throughout Oregon that are helping so many people.
Great, and I'll go next. My name is Amanda Manjares. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am with the Chalkboard Project as part of my day job. And there are so many things that excite me about participating in this particular committee. I think similar to Nikisha, I can just remember when this was the twinkle in our eye when we were talking about whether this was even possible and how we start to think about how the state can begin to be a partner with some of these culturally specific organizations. So to be in a place now where we have such a large amount of applications and exciting programs, I think it'll be a fun conversation. Great, and we can probably shift to committee members now if folks want to introduce themselves.
Okay, I'll go. Hi, I'm Ruby Ramirez, she, her, hers, ella. I'm the Associate Program Officer for Early Childhood at the Oregon Community Foundation. And I'm really excited about this, participating in this because I actually have only recently moved back to Oregon, and I jumped into this process during the rules process. And I love this work. It's kind of why I got into early childhood work. So I'm really excited to see folks get money hopefully soon. Thanks.
Hi, I'm sorry, I was talking to myself because I was on mute, but yes, if you're not speaking, if you would mute, please, so we can hear.
Great.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, let's start with Teresa, and we'll just go down the line as I have that. I know it's hard to know when to jump in sometimes.
So I'm Teresa Martinez. I am she, her, hers, and I am from the Eastern Oregon Early Learning Hub. And let's see, I got into a lot of this work because I came from high school alt ed special education, and I tell you that the demographics of my classes are why we need to be serving these kids down lower ages and these families so that they don't end up in those programs. And that was a lot of why I got into the work I do now. I'm just excited about hearing about all of the things that are happening for kids of diversity in our state right now, and anything I can glean from projects that are happening across the state too that I can bring to serve these populations in my community, I'm so excited about. So
Great. Cool. Mona, you want to go next?
Thank you. Mona Halcomb. I'm the Indian Ed Specialist at the Oregon Department of Education. I'm also a citizen of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and I spent about 20 years in higher ed and always trying to find out how to make our students more successful. And as all of you know, I learned that it has to start as early as possible. So I'm really excited to be a part of this and see how we can support early learning for our communities. Thank you.
Great. Subin, you want to go next?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot my pronouns.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay, she, her, hers, and Nana.
My name is Subin O. I use the he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Senior Early Education Advisor at Children's Institute, and I wear a few different hats at Portland State University, as well as a adjunct faculty member and doctoral student, where my research interests are around critical race theory and social justice in early childhood education. And so I mentioned that specifically because I feel and have noticed and have researched how historically a lot of the solutions around difference have come from a supremacist or kind of colonial orientation. And I feel like the opportunity of this program is lifting up an assets-based orientation to the kinds of solutions that diverse children and families need in the state. And so I'm really excited about this program and what can come from this, and excited to get to know you better, everyone here, through this process.
Great. Joyce, you want to go next? Joyce might be frozen. All right. Or we'll shift over. We'll
This is Shabri. I can go next.
great. Perfect.
Good morning. I'm Shabri Vickers. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I am the Community Development Officer for Wells Fargo currently. I serve on a host of boards, and previous to my role here in philanthropy, I worked for Portland Community College, and prior to that in youth development at a nonprofit. And was excited to hear Subin highlight critical race theory. That is something that I use even in my work at a bank. And so at all times, excited to be able to lift that up, the concepts of that, ask ourselves how we come against just general white supremacist perspectives in this work, and look forward to working with you all.
Great. Thanks, Shabri. Joyce, are you able to?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Okay. So my name is Joyce Harris. Go by the pronouns of she, her. I am currently the chair of the African American Black Student Success Plan Advisory Committee for IDE. Involved with a lot of other things, but I recently retired this past August. So one of the things that I have been engaged in over the years is looking at early childhood education in the state, particularly as it impacts the lives of African American, Latino, Native American, and other underrepresented populations. One of the focuses of our African American Black Student Success Plan is early childhood education. And one of the things that we have not been able to do is to really put that on the front burner of our work. We've funded projects for the elementary, middle school, and we even have some high school programs. But one of the areas of focus for us this year is really to fund some projects that are specific to early childhood.
Great.
And I think that's the most exciting thing for me is that we need to make sure that we get the youngest of the young engaged in education in ways that will, in the future, get them to where they need to be in terms of being academically successful in our schools.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. And you're modeling perfectly. I appreciate the troubleshooting. I know you're having some issue with the video. So if folks have issue with your video, feel free to call in and we'll just track that on the side here as well. Are there other folks on the line? I think I see one more name here.
Hi, I'm not sure if you're able to hear me.
Yes.
My name is Lindsay Vang, and my pronoun is she and hers. I am actually a senior on-site specialist at Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt's law firm.
Great.
The one thing that excites me about participating in this review committee is that I'm new to this and I'm ready to learn all about it. And also, just to hear what everyone's opinion will be, because I'm always progress and learning all the time. So feel free to let me know what's going on, and I will try to pick it up as fast as we go. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Nutsi, is that how you pronounce your name? Is it Nutsi?
Lucy, like Lucy, but with the N.
Okay, great. Awesome. And other folks, if we're not pronouncing your name right, please feel free to correct us. Great. Is there anyone else? Is that everyone? Awesome. So we'll go to the next slide. That'll get us to our overview of the Early Childhood Equity Fund. So basically, I'm going to give an overview now of how the Early Childhood Equity Fund came to be. Just to give context, we're going to spend less time on it on the 20th because we have a lot of applications to get through. So feel free to ask questions. If you want to get more context or you have follow-up questions between now and then, please feel free to reach out. But I'm basically going to tell you the story of the origins of this. And so just want to say full disclosure that when this was created, I was actually at the Latino Network as their advocacy director. For those of you who aren't familiar, Latino Network is a culturally specific service provider in the metro region, which had been providing these kinds of programs for over 20 years, but had never been part of the state system. So the catalyst for creating this was actually a recognition that Latino Network was not alone in that. There were many other culturally specific organizations who were also providing early learning and parent engagement programs that were designed by and for their community, and similarly were not part of the state system. And to give context for that, I think it's important to note that the Early Learning Division is actually a relatively new agency for Oregon, and before this, the state funded different programs, but there wasn't really a place for all of those to live. And so there just wasn't a mechanism for these groups to get engaged. And so that's really what we're doing here is this is a pilot program. It's a new idea for bringing those folks into the system. So to give the story then of how we started to move it into a policy or what you see today is in 2017, a coalition of culturally specific organizations actually came together and partnered with policymakers to design a fund to invest directly in culturally specific early childhood programs because we felt like those programs were a good best practice for providing culturally sustaining programming, and they were showing strong outcomes when it comes to engaging families of color and preparing young kids of color for successful transitions into kindergarten. The fund was also designed to invest directly in Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes. So that is also named in the law. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, we're on this slide. Sorry. I will say this gives you a sense of where the political will for this fund came from. And that really is, going to these three key facts. Oregon had, at that time, the third lowest graduation rate in the country. There was also a growing recognition that investing earlier, a lot of you talked about this in your intro as well, will have lasting impacts on children and families into the future. And we know that 90% of a child's brain is actually developed in the first 5 years of their life. And finally, in Oregon, a majority of low-income kids actually don't have access to high-quality early learning opportunities, which increases disparities affecting historically underserved kids and families. And as an example, and going back to the origin story for all of this, the program at Latino Network was actually originally developed by Latino parents who were confused when they were told that their kid was already behind when they entered kindergarten. And so that was really the catalyst for these programs starting to develop. So that brings us to the Student Success Act, House Bill 3427, which was passed in 2019, very recently, and which really marked a turning point for Oregon. It nearly doubled the investment in early learning from 200 million to 400 million, and 10 million per year was included for the Early Childhood Equity Fund. So in the context of our early learning system, it's a smaller amount, but again, it's really intended to serve as a pathway for bringing these programs into the system. It's not meant to be, and this is some confusion sometimes, just a fund for kids of color, because the whole system should be culturally responsive. So by design, it was more intended as a pathway. We can go to the next slide. So that gets me to the purpose of the Equity Fund Law, which can really be summarized in these three objectives. So first is to expand access to culturally specific early learning opportunities statewide. And while our sovereign tribes are represented in many parts of the state, many of the existing culturally specific organizations and programs are in the metro region, although we're aware of other programs that are peppered around the state as well, which is why we decided that planning grant opportunities would also be available to grow capacity, which is an objective that's named in the law. But Kim will discuss that in more specificity later. So the second goal really is to bring those culturally specific providers into the early learning system to help make the whole system more equitable and inclusive. The Equity Fund, like I mentioned, is a small amount compared to the whole budget, so that pathway is important. And we wanted it to be a signal that the early learning division was really set up to authentically partner with these agencies to help bring their expertise in, because what we often say is asking folks for their knowledge and experience and expertise without investing can be extractive and harmful. So that's something we want to hold ourselves accountable to, and something that we had, or those are the kinds of conversations we were having with legislators as this was moving as well. And finally, the fund really aims to close opportunity gaps for those who experience disparities caused by at least two of the factors that are included in the law, and we'll go over that later as well. So are there any questions on that origin story before we get into the review process? Cool, I'm glad that was clear. Yeah.
I don't have too many questions, but I just want to be sure, are we going to get a copy of this deck, so that we have just general information?
Absolutely.
Getting ready for the 22nd. Thank you.
Yeah, and when we get to the end, you'll see a lot of language and definitions. One, we'll definitely share the deck with you, and we'll talk about the materials you're going to receive. Didn't want to overwhelm you with it. But there's going to be background materials that will give you access to some of, I know some folks are more familiar with culturally specific programs than others, and so we'll give you a background information, but we'll also give you the language and definitions that we're talking about as well. So really, we're just giving you a primer right now. Cool, any other questions? Awesome, so I'll hand it over. Sorry, Nikisha, were you saying something?
Just a couple of comments, but no questions. So.
Okay, cool, great. Awesome. So Kim, I'll hand it back to you to talk about the process.
All right, thank you. Okay, so next slide, please. So here on this slide, you can see the timeline of the sequence of events that some has already taken place and some that will take place. And as you can see, today is May 13th, and so we're halfway there. So anything above has already has already taken place. So on May 4th, the request of applications were due, and so agencies has turned in their applications for us immediately. On May 5th to the 11th, we had independent reviewers that began scoring the applications. Each application is reviewed by at least 2 reviewers, and if there's more than a 30-point difference, then there was a third review. Then independent reviewers were internal staff and external individuals who has expertise in early care and education. And then on May 11th, all the scores were due. So right now we're compiling all the scores. And then it brings us to today, which we're here with this orientation, where we're trying to do our best to help you all understand the foundations, the roots, and kind of the reasons why we're here, and for you to understand what your role is, so that when we meet next Wednesday on the 20th, we'll all be prepared and ready. And so, as you can see on the timeline, on the 20th, we will convene and look over the scores again, applications, look at the materials, kind of talk about it. I'll give you a list of materials that you will be receiving, and that you would have make sure that you look at it before we meet on the 20th, and then and then on the 20th we would then send recommendations to the Early Learning Systems Director, and then on the 5th we'll find out that who was selected and chosen and who is being awarded the grants. And so this is kind of the timeline of where we're at, and so that's what's going to happen. So as you can see, we're just right at the core of the process right now, where we're going to dig deep and look into the applications together and kind of come up with recommendations. And so right now, that's what we're going to do. And so here on this slide, you can see where we're currently at. We had, as what Amanda stated earlier, we have up to $10 million to fund this opportunity. We had 62 applications that were submitted geographically from all over Oregon, and it was a little over 14 million was asked. And so as you can see, we're going to kind of have to have some hard conversations as to, there's more that they're requesting than what's available. And so we're going to have some good conversations as to funding and the agencies. And so our goal is to serve at least 2,500 children statewide, geographically all over as well. For example, we want to make sure that it's not specifically just in certain counties. It needs to be geographically as well. And so what your role is to prioritize the applications based on the vision and the purpose of the Equity Fund, and then to provide final recommendations to the Early Learning Systems Director on which applications should be awarded. So that would be our main goal on the 20th when we meet, okay? Any questions?
Yes, this is Joyce. I do have a
Yes, this is Joyce. I do have a couple of questions. How are you going to ensure that there's demographic representation in the grants that are awarded?
So in the applications, and I'm going to speak to it in a little bit, in the applications, they have to define geographically where they're at, the demographics they're serving. And so there's certain criteria that they must meet in order to, for their applications to move on to the next step. And so you all will get a copy of every single application that was submitted. And so those are kind of a part of the materials that we're going to ask for you all to take a look at beforehand. You will receive a summary of every single application. But if you have the time, we would love it if you could look at all the applications, because it will define the agencies define themselves exactly geographically where they're at, who they're serving, for how many years, what are they currently doing, and so it'll go in depth like that, and so you have all that information.
Yeah, and I'll just say
okay,
that's a great...
and the reason why go ahead.
I was going to say the reason why I asked. Sorry, go ahead.
The reason why I asked that question is I think about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a application process, and there were some issues in terms of how they were scored. And I was actually contracted. I worked at Education Northwest, and I actually did a review of that whole process. And there was some glaring disparities in how the applications were scored. And I mean, I brought in an evaluator, and we looked at interrelated, inter-rater reliability. So we looked to see if there were discrepancies at the scores, because is in some cases there were two applications. How
Oh, shoot.
that had the same information, and they were scored so differently. One was scored high, the other one was scored low. And so I'm hoping that in this process they were able to, in this actual review. That's just one thing that, you know, and I will look at all the applications, you know, just to if there are any of those that need to be called out before final decisions are made.
Yeah, I just want to reflect back what I heard, because you did cut out a little bit there, is that in the scoring process and what you went through before, there were wild discrepancies. And as you all reviewed that process, it was clear that even though folks had similar information, it was showing up differently in the final scores, right? And so we'll just say that that's exactly why this review committee is so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly why this review committee was set up and why it's so important. The scores are only one piece of the puzzle here. They're only one piece of how we're going to get to those final set of recommendations. So it'll be included, and that's why the process was happening before we get to this piece. But the job of this committee, going back to the purpose that Kimberly was talking about, really is to be that final set of eyes to make sure that we're fully considering, one, going back to the purpose and intent of the law, who are we serving with this fund, right? And that's going to be important. So we're going to have 62 applications to get through, and I'll tell you, it's been really fun to try to figure out how to get through 62 applications in a way that really allows us to apply a lens that is going to get us to that outcome. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the eligibility, and I was going to dive into this slide and the next one, which is the definitions that were established in rules. And again, you'll get this information with your packets, but want to just really emphasize it because it's going to be a very important part of the conversation. So because you can only get so much through the applications. Ruby, yes.
Right.
So I know that we have 14 million or whatever, 14 million-ish in applications. The equity fund was supposed to be 10 million, and we're going to prioritize, but knowing that we probably don't have $10 million, what does that mean in terms of like being realistic about how we prioritize?
Yeah, so I can speak to that because I'm in the weeds of the advocacy around the Student Success Act right now. Obviously, everybody here is well aware that we're in the middle of an economic crisis. Like, we're not tone deaf to that piece, right? This is a crazy situation we're in. And I know that the agencies have been moving forward in terms of making sure that we're keeping the process going, and without certainty or understanding how much we're actually going to have, and we'll learn that on the 20th. We're going to keep this process moving forward. But I will say, I did just see the governor did ask, and folks may have seen this in the news, for agencies to reduce their budget by 8.5% as a recommendation. We expect a special session may be called to take a more nuanced approach, because she would only be able to cut across the board. But we're also thinking about other ways. We're thinking about equity at the center of all of this, right, in the response. So what I did see in the plan that ODE originally came up with is that the equity plans, for example, the Native American, Alaska Native plan, for example, that I know Mona is really heading up, and the Latino Student Success Plan are being held harmless. And so there is an opportunity to be thinking about this a little differently. The early childhood advocates are also lining up to figure out, how do we make sure that there continues to be a meaningful investment in early learning, recognizing that we're seeing a really challenging economic situation that's going to affect the entire state, not just early learning. So, so for this process, we want to make sure that we give the director the cream of the crop, right? These are the folks that are really going to set our foundation. That's a really good way to think about it right now, is how do we make sure that we're using this process and these recommendations to say, these are the folks on the ground, these are the folks who are serving our most vulnerable youth and their families in a way that is really meeting their needs. So we need to make sure an investment happens there. So our work is really to pull that together, right? And so hopefully that answers your question. I know it's like a buried, like we don't know what's going on right now, but we'll figure it out soon.
But it is the elephant in the room, so thank
Yeah,
you, Ruby.
totally.
So we have
Can I follow?
Ruben who has a
Can I
question.
follow up? Yeah, just on that. So, if we recommend 10 million and is there some sort of are we looking at like a first, or are we tiering them, recognizing that if there is in fact an 8.5% cut or something like that, is there like a third tier that maybe we say if we have to not have one that still fits into the 10 million, it would be like 2 or 3? Is that an option, or how are we thinking about that?
Yes, that is an option. Right now, we're thinking about bringing it down from the 14 million to the 10 million, but it's absolutely something we should consider and that staff should track in the notes. We're pulling together a master spreadsheet, so we'll go through that as we have the conversation. And again, are figuring out ways to make sure that we're focusing on the strongest applications, but also taking all of the criteria into account. And so there will be an opportunity to do that. We're trying to think about it, especially given the limitations of Zoom and how we think about this. So I think part of it is recognizing that all of the notes are going to be taken and all of the discussions in these pieces, and we'll have a final list, but the more information we can provide and the more thinking we can put down on paper for the early learning division director to consider if they do have to make cuts to that amount will be helpful for them. Yeah, great, cool. So
I just have two quick questions. One, in the timeline, I didn't see when we would actually get to the applications in our hands to be able to review them. And I feel like it's important to see it before the 20th because on one hand, we kind of know or have an idea across the state what is needed, but we have to make do with the ingredients that we have, right? And so, yeah, so I'm curious about that, about when we're going to see the kind of the whole of the applications. And related to that, will we also see the rubric that came with the scoring instead of just the final score?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can provide that as well. There is a matrix and a rubric that we can provide with the summaries that are for the scoring specifically. I do think they're a really good touch point. What we're doing for the meeting is translating those into a series of questions, so really applying it as a lens. So our hope is, I think it's great to be able for the committee members to be able to see kind of the full thing, and then it'll make sense when you hear it again on the 20th. So Kim is going to go through all of the materials you're going to receive in advance. You'll absolutely receive those right now because the timeline has been so constrained because we gave folks longer to actually submit their applications. It really shortened the timeline, and so we'll make sure you have every minute you can to take a look at those, but we're trying to get those in your hands as soon as possible. It'll definitely happen this week, but Kim will go over that as we get to the end of this piece, so talk about next steps. Cool, so I'm going to cover these 2 points on eligibility and also the definitions, and then Kim is going to talk about what to expect with the applications and also where we're going in terms of next steps and what you should expect over the next week. So on this piece for the eligible applications, I just wanted to notice here that the law actually requires to be eligible that the organization or program be culturally specific. So there are programs that are absolutely culturally responsive, maybe doing great things to serve the communities that they're working with, but it does require that they meet this criteria first, along with what you see here with 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is that they're serving communities within our geographical boundaries or within Indian country of a federally recognized tribe, that they're demonstrating experience, providing outreach support and resources, and that they're providing outreach support for those who are experiencing systematic disparities based on 2 or more of these factors: race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, English language proficiency, and geographic location. This is in the law, and the law had to be constructed that way. And so really, this is, in terms of eligibility, I just want you all to take a minute to read through this when you receive your applications and really take it in. And then the 5th piece is they should demonstrate how people in leadership positions, directors, managers, board members, belong to the cultural community served. Again, that's where you start to see the distinction into culturally specificity versus culturally responsive, which again, our point on that is that the entire system needs to move in a direction of being culturally responsive. So we'll go to the next next slide. So I also wanted to say that, you know, and to Ruby's point and to Joyce's point, this committee really is serving as that final check on the eligibility criteria. And these definitions are really important because the groups who helped pass the law, pass the law, actually were involved in the rulemaking process as well, which was a fairly diverse rulemaking body to really dive into these definitions of what we mean by culturally specific methods, culturally specific organization, and culturally specific early learning program. And so you'll have these in your notes, but it's not an easy definition, right? And so these were actually adopted by the Early Learning Council. So the proposals have to meet this criteria in order to be funded. And so I'll start with looking at some of the key elements here. What we're going to do, I would go back to that other slide. So some of the key elements here to notice is what we're going to translate into what I'm calling a lens, right? When you're looking at culturally specific methods, you're looking for specific things. You're looking for them being designed by or adapted by members of the community. And adapted by means a lot of times you'll see organizations that have a set of curriculum, right? And they adapt it, they apply the cultural elements, they think about it, they're not starting from scratch. So that's what adapted by means. And that it reflects the values, beliefs, and practices and worldviews of the community served and provided in the preferred language. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about culturally specific methods. The two pieces I would really dig into is the difference between a culturally specific organization and a culturally specific early learning program, which could potentially actually be operated by a dominant culture organization. So it's basically a program within a larger organization. So those are eligible as well, but they still have to meet key criteria. So when you're looking at a culturally specific organization that serves a particular cultural community, and this is a thing, the first thing you want to do is identify who is the cultural community being served. And this is to Joyce's point, right? We need to make sure that a community has been identified. It isn't for just a general population, it is for a specific cultural community. For organizations, they're primarily staffed and led by members of that community. They also demonstrate an intimate knowledge of the lived experience of that community. And then if you read the rest of it, you can get a sense of the examples of that. On culturally specific early learning programs, and Ruby, I'll get to your question once I go through this one. It really is, again, it could be operated by an ESD or another organization as an example, but it's designed to serve a particular cultural community. So step one, you need to identify who is the cultural community being served. It's primarily staffed and led by members of the community being served. And it's designed by or adapted by members of the cultural community that it's served. It has to meet those three elements in order to qualify as a culturally specific program, even if it's within a dominant cultural organization. So these are the first, it's the first level of criteria before we get into the other elements. And I know the early learning staff did their best in applying this into the application, but it's challenging, right? Because it's a set of factors. And so we're really that final view and final check on that. Ruby, did you have a question?
You kind of answered the question, but my comment, I can still make a comment. The RFA and the way the application was written, it made it look like if you have experience serving these populations, but it didn't, then you could apply. But it seems like it was possible for an organization that has experience serving these populations to apply without being culturally specific, right? So like if they say, well, we serve 80% Latinx or 80% Black children and families, that's fine, but it's not culturally specific. So I don't know, like, I don't think that's teased out in the application. So that means I'm looking, I anticipate a lot of those decisions being made in this committee. So I'm glad that you're pointing that out because it's not clear in the application necessarily.
Yeah, and it's, again, it was challenging for folks to translate that there. So you really need that nuanced perspective. You need a human just to look at it and to be thinking about it in that way, which is why we have to dig into that. Because again, you might identify that community, but you have to look at the staffing, you have to look at the curriculum, you have to look at the different elements of it. And so we'll dig into that and we'll get through as many applications as we can. Again, we're trying to figure out timing and all of that. But appreciate you all, just focusing on this space. So we'll go to the next slide. And again, you'll get all of this information, but I'm going to hand it over to Kim to talk about the program types as we get into the last 10, 12 minutes of this presentation.
Okay, yes, so grant types. There's two types of grants that the applicants can apply for. There's the program grants and the planning grants. And so program grants are grants that are for culturally specific organizations to deliver culturally specific programs. Okay, and then planning grants are to help the culturally specific organizations build the capacity to deliver the culturally specific early learning programs. So for example, if you're trying to start something up, it's probably best to apply for a planning grant. Like if you're trying to look for the staffing, you're trying to build the infrastructure, that's what the planning grant would be for. The program grant is when they're going to implement the program already. And so organizations are allowed to apply for more than one grant opportunity. So this means that applicants can apply for more than one grant, can apply for a grant, a program grant, and a planning grant. And so you'll see when you get the applications that you're going to see several names pop up multiple times because they're applying for different grant opportunities. Okay. Next slide. So within that, there are program types. Now, there are a number of type of programs in which the program grants can fund. For example, parenting education, parent-child interaction, kindergarten transition, and tribal language preservation and revitalization that is embedded within the first three type of programs. So when we talk about parenting education, those includes education programs that are focused on enhancing parenting practices and behaviors, such as developing and enhancing positive parent techniques, learning age-appropriate child development skills and milestones, kind of promoting positive play and interaction between the parent and the child, and locating and accessing resources and community services for the child and for the family. When we talk about parent-child interaction programs, those are programs that serve both the parent and the child together to support positive child interaction. And as a result, we would hope that would promote healthy attachment and bonding and child development within the two. And then for the kindergarten transition programs, those include targeted programs that will prepare the child and the family and the schools during the transition process of them entering kindergarten. Now, these programs will provide the child and the family's opportunity to get familiar with the kindergarten transition and the skills and routines and expectations that they're going to learn and adapt to in kindergarten. And this will also help the schools prepare for the child and for the families as well. And when we talk about the tribal language preservation, now these are early childhood programs that would be integrated within, the parent education program or the parent-child interaction or the kindergarten transition, and helping them preserve and restore and maintain their tribal languages. And so that is what is considered for the tribal language preservation programs. And so, like I said, a culture-specific organization are allowed to apply for multiple grants. You will see in the applications, there are some that applied for one, the other, and so you'll see multiple applications from one agency that's specifically trying to target one program, and the difference between the program and the planning. And so you'll see that when you get the applications. Next slide. For the applicant content, now in the application, it had sections that had a series of questions for the agencies to share with us and for the reviewers to see. In section 1 and 2, they weren't scored. That's basically them giving us their general information, them saying they meet the eligibility. And then what happened is in section 3 and 4, that's where all the weight of the score was on. They had to state, okay, for example, in section 1, that they met the criteria of, geographically serving the children's in Oregon, the demographics. They have to explain why and how. And so section 3 and 4 is the meat of the whole application. It's them telling us what they're currently doing, what they're currently offering, who is benefiting from their programs, what they're planning on doing. Section 4 is where they tell us, we are requesting this much funds, we are proposing to do this, yada, yada, and this, and this is how we're going to implement it. This is how we're going to monitor the process. This is how we're going to ensure that we're doing exactly what we said we will. And so you'll see in the application when you receive it, section 3 and 4 is the meat and grind of the whole entire application, is where all the scores are on. And so you will see that when you get the applications. With that being said, like I said earlier, the independent reviewers were assigned applications, and they went through the whole application, giving them a score. And if there was more than a 30-point difference, there was a third reviewer. And so every application had at least 2 reviewers, and then a third if needed, if the score was so drastically different. And so we can get the average of what those scores were. So next slide. So I'm going to talk about next steps. So for next steps, you're receiving a number of documents that is critical for you all to take a look at before our next meeting on the 20th. It's going to be the meeting agenda. It's going to be the Early Childhood Equity Fund permanent rules. It's going to be all the applications, the P3 culture specific brief. We'll also add this PowerPoint as well for you all to have notes, and we'll also make sure that you guys have the scoring rubric so you can take a look at that as well, okay? And so you will get all of that. Please expect, if you have not gotten a Zoom email invitation yet, you will be getting one, and they will have all the information for you to take a look at, okay? And so definitely it is critical that everyone takes a look at the information before we meet on the 20th in order for us to have enough time to go through the applications, for us to make sure we all have a basic understanding of all applications, what they're asking, and so we know how to move forward on the 20th, okay? Next slide. And so, like I said, next week on the 20th, we will meet from 9 to 4. The Zoom meeting will be sent out. If it has not been sent out, the information will be coming to you all. I know that gives you exactly just like 7 days to look at the information, but there will be a synopsis of a summary of each application. If you don't have the time to go through the entire application, it would be best if you did, for you to understand and get the whole picture of the agencies. But if you don't, there will be a summary provided for you to take a look at in case. And that summary will say geographically where they're located, what they said they're going to serve, what programs they applied for, general agency overall information that they provided, and what they're requesting for. And so the summary will have those basic informations, and so you can take a look at that if you don't have the time to look at all the applications. But I will stress that it is important that all these information are, you all take a look at it before the 20th for us to have a productive meeting, for us to have recommendations for the Early Learning Systems Director, and for us to be on time. Okay.
I'll just add to 9 to 4 is a long day, so I promise we'll give you breaks.
Promise.
I promise.
And so this is Nikki. I wanted to chime in that you all should have received appointments for the 20th. If you don't have that, let me know right away. The appointment will be updated with the Zoom information, and as Kim was saying, some of the other materials as well. But you'll receive instructions on how to access the information that we're making available to you.
All right, so I think that's pretty much our orientation today. We have a couple of minutes to go. Do you have any questions? If you think of any questions later, feel free to email Adina. Adina will respond. If not, she will send to the appropriate person, whether it is Amanda or Nikisha or I or someone above us. So if you have any questions right now, if we have time for questions. If not, then you can always email us questions as well.
Great, and just want to thank you all again for taking the time. Again, we're setting a precedent here, and just seeing the group, I'm really excited to spend the day with you on the 20th, and excited to see what we come up with. Cool. Good to go? 3 minutes early?
Like I said, if you have any questions, please email Adina, please email us, and then we'll get to you, okay?
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.